In the frozen expanse of the Arctic, one of the world's deadliest predators roams, the polar bear. Without protection, surviving an encounter with such a creature is less than a 10% chance. While many believe polar bears avoid humans, hunger or perceived threats can trigger aggression. For thousands of years, indigenous peoples like the Inuit have coexisted with these powerful animals, developing ingenious methods to stay safe, knowledge that we are only beginning to understand today. The vast Arctic is home not only to polar bears, but also to Inuit communities, creating a unique coexistence that has persisted for millennia. Currently, the Arctic Circle is home to approximately 22,000 to 31,000 polar bears. The largest population lives in the Canadian Arctic, where around 16,000 bears roam the sea ice and coastal areas. Meanwhile, Canada is home to roughly 65,000 Inuit spread across 50 communities in the north, many of which lie in areas ideal for polar bear habitats. Naturally, this geographic overlap leads to frequent encounters between bears and people. In Nunavut, Canada's largest territory, official agencies document anywhere from 300 to 8,000 polar bear sightings each year, and that only counts recorded encounters. In communities like Arviat on Hudson Bay's west coast, locals report seeing polar bears near homes at least once a week during ice-free seasons. Over the decades, the frequency of these meetings has increased as changes in sea ice structure push bears to spend more time on land, bringing them closer to Inuit settlements. Back in the 1980s, a typical coastal village might report 20 to 30 bear encounters per year. Today, some communities face hundreds annually, making traditional knowledge of polar bear behavior more important than ever. Before the era of powerful rifles or electric fences, the Inuit developed highly effective ways to defend themselves against polar bears. Their strategies weren't based on modern technology, but on something far more reliable: generations of knowledge and lived experience. At the core of their survival strategy was the understanding that bears were not mindless killers, but intelligent beings worthy of respect. This was practical knowledge, not just philosophy. By recognizing the thought patterns, habits, and behaviors of bears, the Inuit could anticipate their actions and avoid dangerous encounters. Their first line of defense was a remarkable skill: detecting bears before any direct contact. Hunters developed a sophisticated technique for sensing wind direction, using damp fingers to feel subtle changes. They would build tiny piles of snow and watch how the wind disturbed them, revealing hidden air currents that might carry the scent of a bear. One elder recalled that his father could detect a bear more than 2 kilometers away, simply by reading the faint signals in the wind. The Inuit became true masters at reading tracks in the snow. They could determine a bear's size by the depth of footprints, gauge hunger levels, assess directness of movement, and even predict intentions based on stride length. "Snow is like a newspaper," one hunter said. "You just need to know how to read it." Perhaps their most astonishing skill was reading a polar bear's breathing. Calm, steady breaths signaled curiosity, while shallow, erratic breaths suggested fear, and deep guttural growls meant the bear was already aggressive, signaling the need for a backup plan. These abilities were so effective that modern polar bear researchers have begun incorporating Inuit traditional knowledge into their safety protocols. The Inuit became experts at anticipating danger before it reached them. Snow tracks told stories. A straight, determined path often meant a bear was on the hunt, while meandering prints suggested a wandering or curious animal. Hunters could even estimate a bear's hunger or intention by studying stride length and depth. Wind reading was another essential skill. Slight changes in air currents could reveal a bear's presence long before sight or scent. Using damp fingers and small snow piles, Inuit hunters learned to interpret these subtle signals with extraordinary accuracy. One elder remembered how his father could detect a bear from over 2 kilometers away simply by noticing faint variations in the wind. Understanding a bear's breathing added another layer of insight. Calm, measured breaths suggested curiosity. Shallow, panicked breathing indicated fear. Deep, guttural growls warned of imminent aggression. These skills helped communities plan their movements, store resources safely, and avoid risky encounters. Resource management was a critical part of survival. Food was never kept close to homes. Instead, caches were built downwind and often on raised ice or snow platforms to prevent bears from accessing them. Multiple storage sites reduced risk, while lamps burning seal oil were strategically placed so smoke carried away from living areas. Cooking was done in separate snow-built kitchens with ventilated tunnels, and moss was sometimes added to smoke to mask scents further. Even the smallest details mattered. Meat was matured in snow-covered stone caches instead of drying in the open, limiting attractive odors. Every precaution, from shelter placement to food storage, aimed to minimize the likelihood of drawing bears near. The ingenuity of the Inuit went beyond tools. They adapted their entire environment for defense. Structures were designed with the natural behavior of bears in mind. Igloos weren't just for warmth. Their dome shapes could withstand incredible weight, and entry tunnels were narrow and low to deter bear intrusion. Villages were strategically located on high ground, using prevailing winds and natural ice formations to reduce encounters. Pathways around homes were packed snow that creaked underfoot, alerting inhabitants to approaching bears even at night. Night watches were an essential practice. They combined vigilance with storytelling, tool maintenance, and training the young to read bear behavior. These exercises were both practical and educational, turning evening duty into the community's first TV show, according to one elder. Avoidance was always the goal, but the Inuit also understood a hard truth. Sometimes a confrontation could not be prevented. When that moment came, survival depended on preparation and teamwork rather than brute force. Before firearms existed in the Arctic, Inuit hunters developed weapons specifically designed to stop a polar bear. The most important of these was the bear spear, typically around 2 meters long. This was not a simple sharpened stick. It was a carefully engineered tool, often made from driftwood or whalebone, materials strong enough to withstand extreme cold without snapping. The spear's head, carved from walrus ivory or bone, featured barbs designed to lodge inside the bear's body. If the shaft was torn away, the embedded tip would remain, causing blood loss and allowing the animal to be tracked. Some spears were modular, allowing hunters to quickly replace damaged tips. Others included a clever quick-release system. If a bear grabbed the spear, the hunter could let go, sacrificing the weapon but saving their life. This single innovation prevented countless deaths over generations. Dogs played an equally critical role. Inuit sled dogs were not just transport animals, they were an early warning system and a living defensive barrier. Trained to react to polar bears, dogs would form protective circles around people, barking loudly and confusing the predator. Experienced dogs could even distinguish between male and female bears by scent, reacting differently depending on the level of danger. Communities also relied on passive defense systems. Lines made from stretched cord and hollow seal bones were placed around camps. When the wind moved them, they produced eerie sounds that warned of approaching bears. Ice block structures were built to create narrow corridors, slowing a charging bear and giving defenders time to react and reposition. Weapon maintenance was a matter of survival. Spear shafts were regularly treated with seal fat to prevent cracking in freezing temperatures. Spare parts were stored in snow caches where the temperature remained stable. Later, when metal tools became available through trade, they required even more care. Wrapped in sealskin, metal was protected from becoming brittle in extreme cold. As one hunter famously said, "In the Arctic, your weapon is only as reliable as the care you give it." The Arctic is never static. Its conditions shift dramatically with each season, and the Inuit adjusted their safety strategies accordingly. They understood that polar bears also change their behavior throughout the year, and ignoring these patterns could be fatal. Spring was considered the most dangerous season. After months of winter scarcity, bears emerged hungry and unpredictable. During this time, Inuit communities doubled their precautions. Travel was done strictly in groups, and hunting trips were limited to the brightest hours of the day, when bears were less active. According to elder accounts, nearly 40% of serious bear encounters occurred in spring, earning it the nickname the Season of Hungry Shadows. Summer brought different challenges. As sea ice melted, polar bears spent more time on land, increasing the risk of encounters near coastal settlements. To adapt, Inuit camps were moved farther inland, away from shorelines that bears frequently patrolled. Special summer routes were developed to avoid known denning areas and hunting paths. Hunting priorities also shifted. Instead of seals near the ice edge, Inuit hunters focused on caribou and fishing, reducing the likelihood of crossing paths with bears. Autumn required preparation for another type of threat. During this period, bears actively fed to build fat reserves for winter. Inuit hunters noticed that bears followed consistent routes year after year. These high-risk areas were marked with stone piles and other signs, creating a shared mental map of danger zones. Over generations, this evolved into a sophisticated geographic warning system. One of the most fascinating practices was the use of bear calendars. These were detailed mental or oral records of when and where bears were typically seen. By tracking these patterns, communities could predict bear movements and plan camp relocations in advance. Winter introduced its own extreme challenge, the polar night. With darkness lasting around the clock, visibility was nearly non-existent. Inuit survival depended on senses other than sight. They learned to read snow and ice through touch, identifying terrain types beneath their feet and detecting dangerous pressure ridges favored by hunting bears. Certain ice formations amplified sound, and camps were deliberately placed near these natural amplifiers to provide early warnings. Winter camps were often surrounded by snow walls. These structures blocked wind, reflected even faint moonlight, and improved visibility in the darkness. Together, these seasonal adaptations formed a dynamic system of defense, constantly adjusted to the environment. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect was how this knowledge endured. Each generation added new observations to a shared foundation of experience, creating an evolving understanding of polar bear behavior that was both precise and practical. Survival in the Arctic was never an individual effort. One of the Inuits' greatest strengths was their community-based defense system. Every member of the settlement had a role, and safety depended on cooperation rather than heroism. Children were taught awareness from an early age. Instead of instilling fear, elders focused on respect and understanding. Young Inuit learned to recognize warning signs such as disturbed snow, unusual silence, or changes in animal behavior. These lessons were shared through stories, games, and repetition, ensuring the knowledge stayed embedded for life. Night watch was another critical element. Camps operated on rotating guard systems, especially during high-risk seasons. Guards were not expected to fight polar bears, but to detect them early and alert the community. Simple tools such as noisemakers, reflective objects, and fire were used to discourage bears without provoking them. The goal was always avoidance, not confrontation. Weapons existed, but they were considered a last resort. Inuit hunters understood that injuring a polar bear without killing it could make the animal more dangerous. Therefore, restraint and judgment were valued more than aggression. Many encounters ended without violence, relying instead on positioning, sound, and collective movement to guide bears away from camps. Spiritual beliefs also influenced behavior. Polar bears were seen not just as predators, but as intelligent beings deserving respect. This mindset shaped careful decision-making and discouraged reckless actions. By treating the bear as an equal force of nature rather than an enemy, Inuit hunters reduced unnecessary risks. Over centuries, these practices proved their effectiveness. Long before modern technology, Inuit communities achieved something remarkable: coexistence with one of the planet's most dangerous animals. Their survival was not based on strength or weapons, but on observation, adaptation, and shared wisdom. Today, as climate change alters Arctic ecosystems, this traditional knowledge is more relevant than ever. Modern researchers increasingly recognize the value of Inuit experience in understanding polar bear behavior and environmental shifts. The story of Inuit survival is not just about the past. It is a lesson in how humans can live alongside danger through knowledge, respect, and cooperation. In a world obsessed with control, the Inuit chose understanding, and it kept them alive.